Okay, magandang gabi po mga katipon sa Pilipinas. Ito po ang ating katipunan, muling sumasa inyo mga tagapakinig upang magbigay ng mahalagang impormasyon, magbigay ng liwanag, at higit sa lahat makinig sa inyong mga daing at puro-puro hinggil sa mga problema patuloy na nagpapahirap sa ating kalagayan at kabuhay. Sa susunod na 2 oras, sisikapin po namin ipaliwanag ang iba-ibang bahagi ng ating ekonomiya at mga mabibigat pang local and international issues na may malaking epekto sa ating buhay at kinabukasan. Ito po ang inyong katipon na si Butch Valdes. Kasama po natin dito ang aking co-host na si Itos at ang iba pa natin kasama sa mga katipon sa Save the Nation Movement, Philippine LaRouche Society. At huwag niyo pong kalilimutan yung partido political natin, Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino, KDP. Kami dito ay nag-aanyaya sa inyo na makibahagi sa ating talakayan sa pagsusuri ng mga kasalukuyang problema at paghahanap ng kaukulang solusyon. Okay, andito na naman tayo ito sa madalas natin pinapag-usapan. Everything that's going on ngayon sa mundo at sa Pilipinas, itong mga mandatory vaccines at kung ano mga epekto, at meron po tayong naririnig dyan ng mga komento mula sa mga importanteng tao na itong vaccine na ito ay malaking problema ng skandalo at problema ng bayan natin dahil mukha pong lalong dumadami ang mortality rate natin dito. Pero we're not here really to discuss all of these things. But
pero apart from that, it's also global inflation, economics.
Yung economics po, ang inflation sa 10% na sa Amerika. Number 1 problema nila, patas ang halaga ng bilihin. Tayo din dito, ganyan din tayo, kanya lang, walang paraan para umangal yung tao. No?
Right.
Dahil ngayon tinatabunan ng mga kampanya ng mga politiko na halos katawa-tawa na lang kung anong nangyayari because our politics is just it's like an entertainment. No?
Sarsuela.
Para kang nanonood nga ng sarsuela, entertainment value na lang. Nakakasiguro ko na 90% ng mga lahat na nasasangkot dito sa mga kampanyang to, alam nila na ang darating na panahon hindi mag-iiba ang sitwasyon ng ating bansa.
Lalala pa.
Dahil wala nga talaga tayong nakikitang kakayanan sa mga tumatakbo at mga programa.
Ano pa yan? Now, global inflation, economic problems, the international financial system is still disintegrating.
Yes.
Plus, now there's a threat of war.
That's right. Ito pong nagbabadyang gera dito sa Ukraine. At actually, we were warning about this several months ago, no, that there is going to be a conflict that is brewing, no, and Russia and Ukraine, but and then the US is going to be involved in the NATO. No? Ito, malaki ito kung wag ka na matuloy, pero ano ba yung talagang nangyayari dyan, no?
Yeah.
Ang nakikita po ng karamihan, yung mga lumalabas sa CNN at mga iba pang mga dyaryo, kaya tapos nagbibigay na sila ng analysis tungkol dito. Gusto sabihin, hindi po nila nalalaman ng tunay na nangyari kasi kung makikinig ka lang sa mga propaganda ng ang reaction mo sa propaganda,
Correct.
hindi sa katotohanan. No?
So all of these things are happening today. Tama-tama yung intro natin, ang mabibigat na local and international issues. What, ngayon po siguro, what we're facing is one of the heaviest situations, the most dire, what is that in Tagalog, yung pinakamabigat na talagang kinakaharap natin. So, all of this is happening. And disappointingly, wala sa ating, even our current president and the ones who want to be in his position seem to have no idea of how to deal with this situation. So I think that's a nice intro to what we're going to do today.
Pinag-usapan po namin ito. Kasi pinanood namin itong nakaraan debatihan sa isang television station na ang dumalo lang po ay 4 na kandidato. Yung mga iba ayaw silang dumalo. Pero yung mga dumalong 4 na kandidato po ay eto, sila Marcos, si Gonzales, si Abella at si Leody de Guzman. Okay. At siyempre, tinignan natin kung anong kakaiba ito at tinanood ko. Ang initial impression ko po, napakaganda ng atmosphere.
Production.
Tapos, nakita ko din na ang kalidad ng mga nagtatanong ay hindi pang showbiz.
Hindi pang
Hindi
sarsuela.
pang showbiz. At talagang pinupuntirya at pinipilit ilabas ang tunay na kakayanan ng mga kandidato. The questions were probing in such a way that you will discover the level of competence of the one that is answering. No? At saan yung kanyang what you call ideological bias. No? Dito lumalabas. Ngayon, hindi ko naman masyadong pupurihin yung mga nagtatanong din sa panel. No? But obviously, yung mga nagtanong ay hindi sila showbiz. No? At hindi sila television commentators. Alam mo itong mga television commentators.
Yung mga host lang.
Yung mga host, kunwari, pipilitin kanila para ilabas yung kanilang gusto no?
Correct.
Tapos i-corner kanila para yung gusto nilang conclusion ilalabas. No?
Mababaw.
Dangerous po yun because the more people are not able to decide the competence of the person that is running for president. And so, I still enjoyed it dahil nakakaiba ng konti. No? At may personalities din yung mga nagtatanong. You had people like Clarita Carlos, who keeps on saying that she's been a professor for the past 30 years or something like that. No? And that in effect saying that she has written many books, so you must believe what I say. No? Pero okay na tayo doon kasi meron mga ganyan talaga.
But definitely, she's an intellectual.
Yeah, so, she's doing her bit. No?
Right.
Tapos you got Congressman Suplido, who's a fairly intelligent congressperson, and he had his own questions, although not very incisive. No? And then you had somebody from, the television station's commentator. I forgot his name. No? And then Dante ang the second or the third, I'm not sure, who was from Manila Times. Again, very
So it was a mixed.
scholarly yung kanyang approach because he was editor-in-chief or publisher of the newspaper.
Mixed.
So it was a mixed panel and it was devoid of entertainers
Right.
o yung
Right.
masyadong entertainment value.
Right.
Talagang hinihila. And I saw some comments from Facebook saying basically the same impression I had.
Right.
No?
Right.
The answers were not the best. They're not the. But the other thing I enjoyed in that was that they gave the candidates enough time to explain their position. They gave them enough time, and they came back, and they were able to react to some of the reactions.
Right.
And then the moderator somehow, of course, bakit pag masyadong paulit-ulit na lang ang lumalabas.
Right.
No? Si Gonzales, meron siyang mga paulit-ulit, kanya na ano siya ng belt. No? Pero at any rate, this was being done. And I was glad that, siyempre, bibigyan ka ng sasabihin sa iyo, you have 1 minute to say this, and cling. Wala na, hindi ka na makatapos ng sasabihin mo. No? Tapos, nagmumukha kang na incomplete dito sa gusto mong ilabas na idea. So the moderator was allowing this. No?
Right.
Si Karen attorney Jimeno, no? Who was a lawyer, I suppose. Because of that, she knew that it is not just
One word
being,
answer.
parang
Soundbite.
eto na time na, pigil na, period.
Wala
No?
yun. Yeah.
Binibigyan niya pa ang konting liwib hanggang matapos yung ideya, which was good. No?
Tama.
So that is my comment about this.
Right. And so what we thought of doing, alam niyo po naman, yung chairman, our chairman, ran for senator in 2019, and also he put his name in to become president in this 2020 elections. Of course, later on replaced by now retired General Valdes. Okay, but we thought for this episode, that's why nag-live kami ulit. Maganda yatang episode to. Sabi ko sa tatay ko, chairman. While watching the debate, sabi ko, nako, kung nandyan yung tatay ko po,
Bias
Siyempre,
siya.
bias tayo, pero okay lang yan sa akin maging bias towards because I think I would like to hear, and think the people would like to hear how you would have answered or how you would have done in that debate and answered those questions, which were admittedly a lot heavier than the normal babaw questions in the previous so-called debates.
Yeah. It was also asked of me by many people after watching the debate, and they have contacted me and asked how I would have answered if it was if the question was asked of me, and what were my comments, agreement or disagreement with the answers and viewpoints. And so, nabigyan natin ng ating sariling paningin at pananaw at opinion tungkol dito sa mga sitwasyon na tinatanong. Isa sa mga unang-unang tinanong was si Clarita Carlos, nagtanong siya tungkol sa quad.
Yeah, we have a video.
Sige.
So what we did is we borrowed some of the interview questions, and then we will ask our chairman, of course, to answer them as if he were there and what he thinks, and we will do follow-up questions also. Para maintindihan po natin,
This is not a contest with whatever these candidates. Let them, because I'm not running. I just want the audience to know what the KDP position
stand for
on these issues.
Right.
No? Kasi yung COMELEC binaray yung kandidato natin. Completely ignored the fact that he was a candidate. Ignored his position, ignored the petitions. Grabe talaga itong COMELEC. No? Completely ignored General Valdes.
So now, to our program now, we focus on what would you have answered those questions. So, sige, Ben, let's start the program.
What will be your key priority programs if elected president? And how will you realize these in the next 6 years?
Okay. Ano ba ang key priority program natin pagdating dito sa sitwasyon natin? We have to say that we are now facing the worst crisis ever in the history of our country. And therefore, our key program must address the devastation that this crisis has been put on our country. Meron tayong health crisis, meron tayong economic crisis, at naghalo po ito. No? Ano ang unang-una natin gagawin? Unang-una natin gagawin, dapat nakatutok sa buhay ng tao. At hindi ko sinasabi yung bakuna, ganyan. Ano ang ibig natin sabihin sa nakatutok sa buhay ng tao? Nung nag-umpisa po itong COVID, unang-una ko pong reaction dito, sabi ko, itong reaction ng gobyerno na lockdown, papatay ng mas marami pang Pilipino kaysa dun sa sakit mismo. Because a lockdown means joblessness, and our people, isang kayod, isang tuka, no? Will have no job, no means of survival, and they will get sick and they will die, no? Not necessarily of COVID. So we have to face that. At tinignan natin po kung ano ang immediate assistance na bibigay natin sa mamamayan para lang maibsan para maibsan ng kanyang burden, ng hirap. Sabi po natin, ang pinakamahal na gastusin ng isang pamilya ay tubig, kuryente, at telecom. Yan ang pinakamalaki na pasan ng mga pamilya. Kinakailangan atakihin natin ito. Paano natin? Ang may-ari ng mga yan ay ang mga oligarko dahil dito sa privatization na ilinipat sa kanila ng ating pamahalaan nung panahon ni President Ramos tsaka si Corazon Aquino. Ilinipat sa kanila. Kaya tumaas at nalugmok na sa kahirapan ng taong bayan. Kinakailangan baliktarin natin yan. Kung ikaw ay nasa gobyerno, you will declare a state of emergency and take back the public utilities and cut down electricity rates by 50 to 75%. Bigyan mo ng discount ng 75% ang taong bayan sa tubig, sa kuryente. Malaking tulong ang ginagagawin po natin sa taong bayan. Yan ang unang-una nating gagawin. Pagkatapos, titingnan natin yung ekonomiya. Ang ekonomiya natin ay hindi lang yung pagbabalik sa dati. We have to reverse our economic program from being a service economy and reverse it back to a producer economy. I can expound on that a little later on.
So there you have it. That is our simple platform, not so simple, but at least that's the direction we're going to do if given the chance for the next 6 years. That is a program of government, and that we believe that will stimulate and save as many people as possible.
Ang ginagawa ko ito, pinaputol ko ng
syempre.
konti para hindi masyadong
Kasi
mahaba.
debate to eh. Kawawa naman yung iba, kailangan
Kailangan
sumagot.
magkaroon nila.
Sige, next question.
Kaya ipapasok ko yung mabilisan ko rin.
Tama
Sana
naman.
maintindihan ng mga nakikinig.
Later we can talk more.
Yeah, you can ask me the questions for elaboration.
Right.
Yeah.
Sige.
Professor Carlos, your question, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the 4 presidential candidates who had both the political commitment and the political courage to be part of this conversation. My area of research and expertise is on foreign policy and defense and security, so my first question will be within the rubric of these issue areas. All right. If the Quad were to become a collective security alliance, you, as our country's chief architect of our foreign policy, are you going to make the Philippines as a member of the Quad? Why and why not? This is for all the candidates. I ask this question is that right now I'm sure the big powers are trying to carve their own spheres of influence. And because...
Yes, Dr. Carlos, I would say this. Your premise on the question is if the Quad were to become a security alliance, which means it is not yet a security alliance or a military alliance, which is probably what you mean. So since it is not a military alliance, why are we going to propose ourselves to be part of it? Number one. Number two, for such an alliance, we need to be invited. No? And then we can determine whether we want to be part of it or not. The fact of the matter is that that alliance between, supposedly between the US, Australia, and Japan, and India, which they were insisting that India be included, into a military alliance never really got approved. Why? Because India refuses to be part of a military alliance. And if the time comes that we are being asked to be part of it, we can also refuse the same way India refuses. Why? Because a military alliance is preparation of a geopolitical aggregation of people that are ready to go to war against another group. That's why you call it a military alliance. Why are we going to move towards that? Instead, let us look for an alliance of a group of countries that are moving towards world peace rather than preparing for war.
Okay. Wala tayong track na palakpakan eh.
Hindi
Sigurado pag nandyan kayo, palakpakan yan. Next question. Maraming questions eh.
Our next question will be coming from Attorney Rolex Suplico. Attorney, your question, please.
Madamong salamat, Karen. Mayong gabi sa tanan. Issue po ng kahit kaninong administrasyon, ang korupsyon, na tinatansyang may epekto sa mahigit kumulang 20% ng budget ng pamalaan kada taon. Ngayong magkakaroon ng bagong Pangulo, kailangan muling iakyat sa talakayan ang pagnanais na matigil ang pangungurakot, sapagkat ang isang malinis na gobyerno ay nagsisimula sa isang tapat at marangal na Pangulo. Kung kayo po ay magiging Pangulo, una, kusa mo bang ilalabas o hindi sa publiko ang iyong SALN or Statement of Assets, Liabilities and Net Worth? At pangalawa, kusa ka bang magsasagawa ng waiver sa mga provision ng RA 1405 na nagbabawal sa pagpaalam sa publiko ng laman ng inyong mga bank accounts?
Okay. Alright.
Well, alam niyo po yan, ang alam ko, itong SALN is a requirement of all government officials. Itong mga elected officials have to come up with a SALN in the beginning of his term. I don't know if it is every year. And then at the end. Pag may changes dyan, pag nag-change, what you call network changes. Pag yumaman ka, lumaki yung SALN mo sa
While in office.
yung paglaki niyan, kinakailangan panagutan yan. Saan mo nakuha? No? Ano ang binili mo? Bumili ka ba ng lupa? Saan mo nakuha yung pera? Kailangan panagutan mo yan. No? And kung hindi mo kayang panagutan yan, di siyempre, tatamaan ka ng kung ano man mga ipapataw sa'yo ng ating pamahalaan. But meron ka pang isang sinunod na tanong na sinabi mo, nakahanda ka bang magbukas ng bank accounts mo at lahat. Alam niyo po, pagdating dyan, meron tayong batas na inaano ka yung you are protected, no? Because this is private property, no? And you cannot not just for yourself, but for the people that you are involved in, including your family and your heirs, no, will be affected by disclosing so much of the details. The other thing is, once you have disclosed it, you are putting members of your family at risk. No? It doesn't seem fair that you will be told to open up your bank account on the pretext that I want to see what's inside. You will be asked to open up your bank accounts if there are charges of corruption against you. And if there are charges of corruption and the law and the courts decide you have to open up and we have to know what has happened there, you're gonna have to open up. But yung sasabihin mong kusa mo na lang ibubuksan, it does not seem fair, not just to the person involved, no? But to the members of the family. Kung lalabas dyan million, binubuksan nyo na sila, yung mga member ng pamilya nyo sa kidnapping, yung ganyan. Alam nila kung ilan milyon ang nasa bangko mo. Kikidnapin nila yung anak mo. Wawa ka naman. No? At hindi ka naman gagawa ng paraan para maprotektahan yung kidnapping sa anak mo. Diba? So we have to be circumspect about this and not just use it for propaganda purposes. Okay.
Next question.
At sa ating pagpapatuloy, ang magtatanong naman po ngayon ay ang Chairman and CEO of the Manila Times, Mr. Dante Clink Ang II. Mr. Ang, go ahead.
Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Professor Carlos started us off with a foreign policy question, and I'd like to ask something similar where it converges with gut issues. The public discourse on the West Philippine Sea often glosses over the interests of the smallest stakeholders. It was refreshing to hear several candidates for president mention the need to allow Filipinos to fish in the disputed areas, but we have not heard specifics. The concern for our fisherfolk seems to be growing on a larger audience, particularly the young voters, as evidenced by the release just days ago of a music video featuring the rock band Sponge Cola and singer Karil. If elected president, how will you look after the interests of small fishermen who are occasionally harassed by foreign vessels and often crowded out in the controversial area by fishing boats from countries with competing territorial claims like Vietnam, Taiwan, and of course, China?
Sa akin po, the question is actually rhetorical. No? In the sense na immediately we are presuming that there will always be small fishermen who will be abused or exploited or bullied by the Chinese fishermen or Chinese ships. Sa akin pong ganito dapat wala po tayong small fishermen. No? Dapat po yung ating mga small fishermen, bibigyan natin ng kakayanan. If I was in the government, no? Bibigyan ko din silang malaking barko. At yung mga 20 fishermen na nagpipishing dyan, dito kayo, you will be owning this barko. And you have a big ship to go fishing. No? And gagawin yung parang cooperative yan para mas malaki ang aanihin nyo dyan. At malaki na kayo. Ngayon, kung nakikita natin na itong mga lalaking barko, meron silang mga weapons, no? Yung weapons nila po, hindi naman pang-atake. Ang weapons nilang ginagamit out against the pirates, no? Di ganyan din tayo. Gumawa din tayo ng ganyang barko. Paggawa pa natin sa China, no? Para kamukha nun sa kanila. Tapos maglagay ka dyan ng 20, 50 fishermen working as a group, no? To try to get more, no? Why are you creating a situation where the premise is permanently ang small fishermen na yan? Secondly, since we're talking about China and the China Sea, let us look at the whole China Sea issue, no? Not purely on a territorial issue, not purely as a territorial issue. History will allow us to look, if we only work and research a bit more, no? It is replete with many kinds of solutions that have been presented for conflicts with regard to territory. And almost 100%, the solutions had to be economic, wherein the stakeholders, the people in those areas where territories are being in conflict, benefit from an agreed economic activity. My case in point here is the Treaty of Westphalia. I'm not going to ask you to research on it now, no? But they came up with the principle wherein these areas were not looked at as territorial disputes, but the areas were looked at as economic corridors. It is very important that we look at it that way. If we are thinking of our grandchildren, we are thinking of generations after us, no? Then this is the direction that we should be looking at in coming up with proposals for the China Sea issue.
Okay. Next question.
We have a follow-up question from Professor Clarita Carlos.
Yes, there is no doubt that what is being fought over here is fish, isda. No? And so there is also no doubt that the food security of China cannot be at the expense of the food insecurity of the rest of us. Now let's move away from the pseudo-militaristic perspectives that some of you have noted earlier. And how about thinking about a regional fishing agreement, which is along the lines that Mr. Abella talked about a while back? The reason why I talked about that is, well, there's a personal reason, because I'm writing a book on regional fishing agreement. And since any one of you will become the President of the Republic of the Philippines, I was wondering if it is worth writing that book on a regional fishing agreement. Wouldn't a legal framework called the Regional Fishing Agreement be a solution to that? Because right now what China is doing is unilaterally declaring a fishing holiday. You know, like, wow, bawal mangisda ngayon, ha? Sa susunod na buwan ka mangisda, ha? So, you know, she's setting all the rules for this contested South China Sea. So, if you were the chief architect of our foreign policy, wouldn't you want a regional fishing agreement where every country washed by the East China and the contested South China Sea are participants or members? And if I may add, and this is not to rain on the parade of Mr. Abella and Mr. Gonzalez, I don't think we should lean on ASEAN. You know, the countries which are fed by the Mekong River, I'm sure they will cotton on to China. Because the Mekong is...
Okay. Ms. Carlos, your first premise, I have to disagree. Because you say, it is obvious that ang talagang problema natin dito is the. Hindi po. It might be a corollary issue to some extent. No? Pero ang issue dito po hindi is the. No? Our issue with China only became because of the fish, because the Chinese have decided to assert themselves and make their presence felt in an area which we contest to be ours. It is a disputed area. Now, I agree that there should be a regional fishing agreement, of course. But there must be an overriding agreement. An overriding agreement wherein all our countries, China, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, no? Indonesia, are going to be benefiting from. This is not just a Philippines-Chinese issue. All agreements, whether it is fishing or mining or oil exploration or something, must be part of an overall agreement between the stakeholder nations. It is not right for you to say that the ASEAN has no business in this particular case. It has all the business. Because if you look at your map, the whole China Sea is surrounded by Southeast Asian nations, the ASEAN. And it starts off, the real issue, you know this if you are the foreign affairs expert, the real issue that is being now contested by the superpowers is the control of the Malacca Straits. The Malacca Straits being the narrow point of entry from the Indian Ocean into the China Sea and going towards Europe. Now, if somebody blocks the Malacca Strait, then it controls trade. It suffocates the countries here or suffocates the countries that want to push trade. That's why it is a political and military issue. And the Americans are pushing for freedom of navigation. We have to address this issue of freedom of navigation collectively, not just as Philippines. This is where ASEAN plays a major part. And this is our chance precisely to get out of these geopolitical games of who do you side, America or China. We side with ourselves. But since ASEAN is common to us here, we are the neighbors. We have to take the steps towards promoting economic development for all. And we can talk about the details of it, because I am talking about the principle of the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. This became the template of many territorial disputes over the past how many centuries now? Okay, next question.
SMNI News Senior Correspondent and Anchor MJ Mondejar. MJ, your question, please.
Thank you, Attorney Karen. Medyo mainit yung talakayan no, sa issue ng China and West Philippine Sea. Now let's get back to the basics. Gentlemen, if you become the next President of the Republic, how do you plan to feed the 110 million Filipinos and the next generation if the prices of staple foods continue to increase. Specific po sana ang paglalatag po ng mga plano. Maraming salamat.
Well, the problem about food has always been present with us for so many decades, not even just now. But it gets aggravated now because of the situation we are facing. If you want cheap food, cheap is relative. Cheap means affordable. But nevertheless, we must look at our food and focus on food production. Double, triple, or even quadruple the amount of food that we can produce. We have, like I said, go back to being a producer economy and not a service economy. But since we have transferred our economic policy to become a service economy, meaning wala na tayong production, umihina ang production natin. Pinepuwersa natin na mag-angkat tayo to import rice, to import fish, to import onions, to import fish sauce, patis, and many other things that we're now importing. What does it tell you? That there is food insecurity. Because no country can call itself a nation if it cannot feed its own people. We rely on other countries to feed us now. Somebody came up with the rice tariffication bill. What was the concept there? It said, we will import rice because it is cheaper. So for the time being, temporarily, the people will experience price of rice, which is not going up for a while. But what happens now? The farmers that were actually producing rice will no longer produce rice and they will be forced to sell their land to subdivision developers. What happens now? We kill our own capacity to produce food and start depending on other countries to give us food. What if they increase their prices? That means we starve. Our agricultural production and our food insecurity must be addressed. There is no question about it. Immediately. Now, you cannot just say double, triple, quadruple the amount of food that you produce. It all depends on what kind of infrastructure you have in order to increase your production of food. Number one, important aspect of food production is energy. Number two is water. And both are inextricably linked. Right now, we are dependent on God to give us water. And our energy, we're dependent on the oligarchs. By the way, the oligarchs are in water as well. They control it. Our electricity is so expensive. We have not gone into nuclear energy development because that will mean that the oligarchs will be earning less. We have to keep the oligarchs happy. Mind you, I would like to say now that for the past 6 years of this administration, with all the hoopla and with all the show of fire and brimstone of anger, this administration has not been able to bring down the cost of electricity by 1 centavo. The same thing with water. So we have to approach the food issue in that way. It has to be rationalized, and we have to look at it in a much more comprehensive way. It's a bit complicated, but I know how to do it.
Okay. Next question.
This
Well,
Mr. Ang.
I just want to ask about comparative advantage when we're talking about rice. Because, it's a basic economic precept that says, you shouldn't make things that others can make cheaply. And many people have said that, the Philippines lacks a comparative advantage in rice. So should we insist, I think this is related to the question of MJ, with regard to food security policy, should we insist on continuing planting a crop that we clearly don't have a comparative advantage?
Well, thank you for your question. At least I would understand your question to be bringing out this idea that concept of comparative advantage do not work. Not in this kind of situation. We have to stop looking. We have to stop looking at these types of things that require life for our people on pesos and cents. It's cheaper to import, so let's stop production. I just mentioned the principle. No country can call itself a nation which cannot feed its own people. The moment you can feed your own people, that is your profit. Not the pesos and cents that you can save because some godforsaken country can produce rice cheaper. Why can they produce rice cheaper? Many reasons. Because they are subsidizing their farmers. We are not allowed to subsidize our farmers because the WTO will jump on us, and our economic experts who are employees of that WTO are telling us get out of subsidies. So, if I understand your question properly, you are basically saying that there is no such thing as a comparative advantage, and we must veer away from comparing pesos and cents, no? Because the importation, no? A cheap importation in the short term might work and might have temporary relief, but in the medium and long term, you are killing your own people.
Okay. Next.
From Sas Rogando Sason, isa sa mga anchor ng SMNI.
According to one of the documents the Philippines sent to the South China Sea Arbitration Tribunal, Vietnam occupies 20 features in the Spratlys. The Philippines occupies 10. China occupies 9. Malaysia occupies 4. China, Vietnam, and the Philippines are claiming all these features. This is in the Annex 97 of the Philippine Memorial Volume 4 of the South China Sea Arbitration Proceedings. If during your term as president, China leaves those features, how will you stop Vietnam from occupying the features that China would leave behind, given that there is no international decision granting the Philippines territorial sovereignty over those features?
Okay, your question, Sas, is premised on the big if. If China decides to take over all of those features. And this is where we should try to consider not the big if, no? But before such things happen, no? There should be some moves on our part, no? So that big if that you are saying will not happen. Now, As you mentioned, there is this thing as a territorial dispute. I have repeatedly said in my previous responses that we should not look at the situation here as the territorial, only from a viewpoint of territorial disputes, but look at it as economic corridors, wherein all countries that you mentioned will benefit in a collective effort of development. It can be done. It was done not just during that 1648 time, which developed into what we call now as Europe, but it can be done in different areas. All you have to do is talk. And if our objective is to the improvement of quality of life of all of our population in this area, we can do it. It is logical, it is reasonable, and there is no real enmity between us neighbors, including China. There is one fly in the ointment, though. It's called United States of America, together with the UK, who apparently, because of their own inclinations towards maintaining hegemony over the world, want to be able to control this whole area and look into situations where a principal opponent like China will not take advantage of this situation. Our role, therefore, as the Philippines, must be to take the lead into convening the ASEAN and ask them to take one major position to guarantee freedom of navigation for all who will ply our waters. Once you've got the whole 10-member nations, this is roughly about pretty close to 400 million population. We go to China and ask China to join us in guaranteeing freedom of navigation to the United States, to Australia, to France, to UK, Russia, that this area can be plied on by commercial and even military vessels. Now, since that is the major position of the United States, the next step is we expect them to accept that guarantee. And if they accept that guarantee, the next step we should do is to try to construct that Thailand and China to construct the Kra Canal. The Kra Canal can be constructed in the eastmost of Thailand, the thinnest part of Thailand, about 40 to 50 miles. And you can construct a canal that will connect China Sea and the Indian Ocean. If this is done, and this can be done fairly fast because of the kind of equipment we now have, because we can blast our way through and come up with a canal. It's no longer people just digging. We can use blasting material that can be controlled in order to open up that area. Once that thing is done, you now have two passages going into the China Sea from the Indian Ocean, which will make the control of one redundant. If that is the case, there should be economic cooperative agreements in all areas. Exploitation of natural resources, fisheries, and other things that we might want, no? So that we and our people benefit, and it is rich with the kind of resources we are looking for, even for China. Can we include the United States in those economic development projects? By all means. Why? Because it's for the good of all. It can be done. It only takes a resolve and an honest to goodness intention to improve the quality of lives of all our population. Now, if there is somebody there that has some other ulterior motive, after Southeast Asian nations got together with China and probably the rest of the world agreeing with that, whoever comes up with a different agenda to maintain their hegemony will not be very popular. Okay.
All right, next question.
Our next question is from Mrs. Vilma Absalon, mother of slain FEU football player Keith Absalon, who was a victim of NPA.
Magandang araw sa inyong lahat, na tagapakinig. Ako po si Vilma Balandra Absalon, ina ni Keith Balandra Absalon, ng FAU football player na walang awang pinatay ng NPA. Kami po ay taga Masbate. Kung ikaw ay magiging pangulo ng ating bansa, ano ang direktiba o layunin mo upang matuldukan ang mga terorismong walang awang pumapatay ng mga taong walang kasalanan? At sana tuluyang mapuksa na wala nang ulit na mangyayari na pumatay pa sila ng inusinting tao tulad ng aking anak. Ayoko na ang ating bayan ay maging magulo pa dahil sa kanila. Yun ang hinahanap ko po sa mga pangulo na makipahayag nila ang kanilang layunin sa mga terorismo. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat.
Well, yung question po ni Mrs. Absalon talaga pong kinakailangan sagutin. No? Pero siguro hindi pa na lalaman ni Mrs. Absalon na bagamat masakit po yung nawalan siya ng anak kung kailan naman. No? Meron po tayong programa na pinamumunuan ni General Antonio Parlade, yung NTF-LCAC. Isa po siyang programa para labanan ang kontrol nitong mga NPA at mga komunista sa mga iba-ibang lugar ng ating bansa. Ito po ay nag-umpisa mga mahigit ng 2 taon na po ngayon. Nag-umpisa po yan nung ang dami po ng mga NPA ay umaabot na sa 25,000 armed cadres. May hawak na baril, 25,000. Ngayon po, sa pagsusuri ng mga iba-ibang organisasyon, nakita po nila na dahil po dito kay Antonio Parlade, NTF-LCAC, bumaba na po yan from 25,000 to something like 200 or 300 cadres na lang. Nawala na po ang kanilang kakayanan para makipagsagupaan sa pamahalaan. At kung ano man ang ginagawa nila ngayon is pure banditry. Para na pong mga mga kriminal sa libliban. Ngayon, ang importante natin malaman dito kung ano ba ang ginawa ni Antonio Parlade para manalo ang pamahalaan dito sa gera laban sa NPA. Biro nyo, 25,000 nung pumasok siya, may ng 300 na lang ngayon. Paano niyang nabawasan yan at paano niyang tira sa 2 taon? Ang sabi niya po, dati, Ang solusyon po ng militar sa problemang militar ng NPA ay barilan, bombaan. Ang nangyayari po, may pagbarilan, sagupaan ng mga militar. Pagkatapos, aalis sila doon sa lugar na pinaglabanan, papasok na naman ulit yung mga NPA. At hindi po nauubos. Kasi pasok pa rin ang pasok. At gagawa na naman ng paraan para kumikita po sila. Ang ginawa po ni General Valdes, using the LCAC, ay yung pondo na hiningi niya sa gobyerno, ginagamit po pangtulong sa mga barangay at mga iba-ibang lugar sa ating bansa, sa mga pamilya at mga tao na nangangailangan ng tulong at presensya ng gobyerno. Katulad ng tubig, mga artesian wells, nakakakuha sila ng tubig, at ang kanilang paggamit sa bahay, yung mga pag-ayos ng bahay nila, at iba-iba pang pumumaraan. Kasama din dyan ang pagtuturo sa ating mga mamamayan dito sa mga libliban kung ano ang ginagawa ng gobyerno at kung paano silang matutulungan at hindi na mapapahirapan ng maayos ang kanilang sitwasyon sa buhay. Their economic situation was obviously being improved. Because of this, the NTF-ELPA has been very successful. Now we have to continue being present there. And we have to outdo the kind of propaganda that the NPAs are doing. Kasi ang NPA, sasabihin nila, kanya ka mahirap dahil yung mga mayaman, kinukuha yung kabuhayan. Yung kanila kasi, class warfare. Ang approach po na ginagawa ni Valdes, yan na po ang pinakamahusay mag-explain yan, hindi ako. Pero, it's more comprehensive. And that's why he was successful. Okay.
We have a follow-up question from MJ Mondehar.
Gentlemen, ilang beses po nabanggit yung salitang peace talks. And it seems na sa dami ng taon na lumipas, wala po effect yung old style na peace negotiations. But when the Duterte government diverted at nagtuon po sa pansin doon sa localized peace negotiations, malaki po ang naibunga through the NTF-ELCAC. Ano po bang malinaw sa inyo? Old style peace talks o itong localized peace talks? At ipagpapatuloy po ba ninyo ito once kayo po ay mahalal bilang Pangulo ng Bansa? 50 years po, centralized peace talks ang ginawa ng pamahalaan. Walang resulta.
MJ has a follow-up question.
Para din po sa inyong apat, NTF-ELCAC ba ang solusyon o hindi sa problema natin sa insurhensya? Recently, dineklara po ng pamahalaan na teroristang grupo ang CPP-NPA-NDF. Sa inyo pong apat, kaaway niyo po ba o hindi ang CPP-NPA-NDF? Kaibigan ba o kaaway?
Kaaway po yan. Ang CPP-NPA ay kaaway. Meron po silang armas. Para saan po yung armas? Gusto nilang ipabagsak ang kasalukuyang gobyerno. Yung kasalukuyang gobyerno nandyan dahil halal ng bayan. Ang gusto nila, pabagsakin yung gobyerno at sila mamumuno. Yan ang reason bakit hawak nila yung mga baril. Ang hinihingi po ng ating pamahalaan, ibaba nyo yung baril ninyo. Lumahog kayo sa tamang proseso ng eleksyon. At kung magustuhan ang programa ninyo ng mga mamamayan, iboboto po kayo sa pagkapinuno nitong bansang ito. Pero habang may baril kayo, Bakit naman po kayo hawak ng baril tapos gusto nyo sumali sa halalan? Bakit po kayo humahawak ng baril? Ang karamihan dyan sasabihin dahil marami pang gutom. O maraming gutom na hindi din humahawak ng baril. Ito ba? Now, there is a insincerity on the part of those that are holding on to their guns. No. There is, it is right that we mistrust them. And if their objective is to take over government, then they are enemies of the state. And for them to be considered as terrorists is just appropriate. Okay. Right.
UP Professor Dr. Clarita Carlos.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, again, my question will be on defense and security. It's well known that Russia has indicated many times that it wants to train and exercise with our Philippine military. As a matter of fact, for the first time, it appointed a defense attaché at the Russian embassy here in Manila. This will, of course, require a status of forces agreement like what we have with the US and Australia. As our future chief executive, will you agree to a status of forces agreement with Russia? But you know, remember, we have in fact committed to the...
Yeah. Well, these kind of agreements with Russia or China will have to be seriously considered, of course. But before that, we must review our mutual defense treaty with the United States. What is that mutual defense treaty? Does it mean that their enemies are our enemies? And also, does that mean that our enemies are their enemies? It's time to review this and how to operationalize that if we want to continue with it. I remember President Marcos in his extemporaneous comments being made to the media in the United States when he visited there. He referred to this, the Mutual Defense Treaty. And he said that if the Philippines goes to war, if we understood the Mutual Defense Treaty correctly, the United States will have to go to Congress, and Congress will debate on it and eventually decide whether the U.S. is going to intervene and help the Philippines, he said. Meanwhile, how many millions of Filipinos would have died while they were discussing our lives? Of course, I'm paraphrasing the President Marcos here, but this is what we mean. No? We have these types of treaties that are supposed to make us feel secure, but in reality, is far from making us secure. We came up with the EDCA recently with Noynoy Aquino. And Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. That agreement called for U.S. military installations to be set up inside Philippine military installations. And while inside, this U.S. military installation was off limits to all Filipinos. All, not even our military officers can go and see what is inside there. That is the agreement that Noynoy came up with. These are the agreements that the U.S. has kind of imposed on us or forced us to sign up with them. The sad thing about it is, when this was questioned in the Supreme Court, Noy Supreme Court said it was constitutional. We have to review this before even looking at military agreements, treaties with Russia, China, or even the United States. If the Mutual Defense Treaty does not serve our good, if the EDCA does not serve our good, then we should scuttle it. Because it is only there to serve their good and not ours. We have allowed ourselves to be a military base of a superpower. We have prostituted ourselves, prostituted our sovereignty at the risk of the existence of the Republic of the Philippines.
There is always a first time.
Yes.
But my question is this. My turn. Ayon po sa COMELEC, mayroon ngayong 67 million registered voters. Ayon naman sa RA 7166, ang mga kandidato sa pagkapangulo ay maaari lamang gumastos ng 10 piso kada botante. Habang ang mga political parties naman ay may limit na 5 piso kada botante. Bago before mag-February 8 o ang opisyal na simula ng panahon ng pangkampanya, magkano na po ba ang iyong nagastos at sino ang nagbigay ng pinakamalaking porsyento ng iyong pondong pangkampanya? My follow-up question is, simula noong February 8 or 7 days ago, magkano na po ba ang inyong nagastos? Balak mo bang limitahan ang inyong gastos after February 8 sa nakatakda sa RA 7166? Dideklara mo ba sa Statement of Contributions and Expenditures or SOSE ang tamang amount? Bakit o bakit hindi? Can you give us an estimate? Pwede mo ba kaming bigyan ng estimate kung magkano na po ang ginasto nyo as of today sa ngayong araw?
Is it in order for me to ask my colleague here to elaborate on that question?
With the accounting funding.
Can you give us an estimate? No. Ba't kita bibigyan ng estimate? Alam naman natin, maraming nagbibigayan ng pera sa mga kandidato, no? Dahil meron silang interest na mailagay sa gobyerno o mga kontratang ngayon, iyan dapat mabantayan at kung man mahuli, no? Siguradong kaya niyong i-prosecute. No? Do not make laws just like this one of COMELEC that cannot be prosecuted. It's a stupid thing. The fact of the matter is there are people, there are oligarchs that are paying big sums of money so that they can continue with their rapacious operations on milking the country. Yan yung mga may-ari ng kuryente, mga oligarko sa tubig, yan. Magkano ba sa palagay nyo ang binibigay nila sa mga kandidato? At pag nanalo na yan, magkano pang binibigay nila? Alam nyo po, sa akin bilang, yan lang mga oligarko sa kuryente, siguro mga 8 yan. Sa akin pong bilang, based on the Senate's initial estimate of the cost of electricity per family, of 3,000 pesos a month per family. These oligarchs are earning not less than 5 trillion pesos a year. 5 trillion pesos a year ang kinikita nila. Ang operating cost po dyan, hindi man lalampas sa 2 trillion. Ang kinikita nila, 3 trillion. Kung ang kinikita nitong 8 korporasyon na ito, pagsama mo, 3 trillion, palagay nyo ba kaya niyang bilhin ang mga senador, ang kongresista, at ang namumuno sa ating bayan? Ano ba sa kanila ang 100 billion pesos a year? Barya. Ngayon, sasabihin mo, ito bang mga kandidato, hindi sila bayaran? Ang tanong ko po ganito, sino ba sa mga kandidato ngayon ay naninindigan sa kapakanan ng taong bayan at nakahandang buwagin ang mga oligarko na may kontrol sa kuryente, sa tubig at sa telecom? Buwagin nila yan. Dismantle the oligarchic control of the public utilities so that we can give back to the people up to 75% of what they have been paying before. Is there any candidate that is courageous enough to do this? I know one, but the COMELEC blocked him. His name is General Antonio Valdes.
Actually, yung gusto niyong proposal that the government will pay for your radio, TV time, and your tarpaulins, etc. That can only happen when you shift our parliamentary system, where the political party becomes the pivot of our political life. Outside of that, talagang kailangan magkalkal ka ng sarili mong salapi. And you know the implication when you do that, diba? So let's shift to a parliamentary system. Unfortunately, not one of my colleagues here, including myself, have asked about that because we were limited to 2 questions. So what can we do? If any candidate does not have any political party behind him or her, whatever promises you make, that's just saliva. I don't know, because it's the political party which will make things happen. Diba?
Sa akin, yung pong sinabi ni Clarita Carlos ay mali. Pag daw nag-parliamentary system, mababawasan ng korupsyon o ang gastos sa mga ganito, mga lobbying, hindi po. Meron po pala, pwede pang lumaki ang lobbying dyan. Pwedeng makontrol. Tandaan nyo po, I am not against parliamentary system. But I am against this notion that if you shift to parliamentary system, corruption disappears. That is naive. Corruption will not disappear. Corruption will disappear only from the standpoint of the leadership. If the leader is willing to do what is necessary and focus on improving the lives of the people, he will not be corrupt. He will put people to jail. He will take on the oligarchies that are actually fomenting corruption. Yung mga oligarchic interest, ibigyan nila yung senador, ibigyan nila yung mga drug lords, bibigyan nila yung senador, bibigyan nila yung mga, lahat yan. Eh kung hindi gagalaw yung leader at gagawin ang kinakailangan niyang gawin para mapuksa itong ganito mga problema, walang mangyayari dyan. By example, At pakita niya na seryoso siya, nalalabanan niya. Lahat yan. Droga, oligarko, komunismo, corruption. Pakita niya. Ngayon, sa galit po ng mga tao, gusto nila bumalik ang death penalty. Sa palagay nyo ba, kung meron pinatay na sa death penalty na drug lord, na Silya Electrica industry, sa palagay nyo ba may epekto yan sa drug industry? Meron. Kung andyan pa, di pumatay ka ulit. Sa komunismo, sa palagay nyo ba meron? Meron. Oligarko. Kung pumili ka ng isang oligarko na talagang lumalapas tangan sa buhay ng mga mamayang Pilipino, palagay nyo ba may hinto yan? May hinto yan. Pero, kinakailangan mo isang liderato nakahandang manindigan dito. At siya mismo ay hindi mababahiran ng corruption or any kind of immorality.
I'd like to do this follow-up. There are some questions also raised about campaign finance. And, what is your view on that? It should be limited, unlimited?
Well, yung question na kung kailangan limited, ang hirap po sabihin, no? Because ang pera po nawawalan ng halaga, no? Alam niyo po dati, ang bilihan daw ng boto, 500 pesos. Panahon to ni Corazon Aquino. Bago yun, ang bilihan daw ng boto, 100 pesos. Yung mga eleksyon ng panahon ni Marcos. Pagdating ni Cory, 500. Pagdating ni Ramos, umabot na ng 1,000. Ngayon siguro nagiging 1,000 o kaya 2,000 ang bayaran para sa mga boto. Bakit? May inflation eh. So it's very hard to say you have to limit spending of something. I realize, of course, that only the moneyed people have the facility of getting campaign, what you call it, involved resources, wherein
Big campaign nationwide.
and maybe there is reason for government to actually participate in controlling and somehow, how do you say, making it more equitable, so that maybe banners and billboards are not going to be allowed, and that the government comes up with common billboards, showing all the candidates. It can be done. It only needs resolve.
Mr. Ang, your question, please.
Thank you. I'd like to turn your attention now to education, which I believe is relevant in preparing the country to compete in the future. Mostly, the initiatives in this sector included raising the salaries of teachers. But what is not mentioned in the policy work is that these increases favor only those in the public school system. In fact, the private education system has suffered unintended consequences involving mainly the migration of teachers from the private to the public sector. This is an added strain on the private schools, and it imperils the jobs of hundreds and thousands of teachers, administrators, and other employees. They have been reminding lawmakers and policymakers that the 1987 Constitution recognizes the complementary roles of public and private institutions in the educational system, according to Article 14, Section 4, Subsection 1. My question is, as President, how will you execute the constitutional provision on complementarity in education so that we have a stronger educational system built on a true-to-form public-private partnership? I think one of the existing programs now is the voucher system, given directly to students, allowing them to choose whether they...
Yeah, well, you're referring to an administration problem. And that my view of education is something much more comprehensive than what you had mentioned. But nevertheless, let me say this. At the time when I was Undersecretary for Education, I had pushed that all the textbooks that were going to be purchased by the elementary grades of the public school system must be the same as the textbooks of the private school system. And therefore, those that were pushing for textbooks, not just for the private sector, were also the same as those that you will be getting, so that the level and quality of education of the public school system and the private school will be the same. This was actually looked at with favor by the people from the World Bank at that time, but it seems somewhere along the line this was not implemented because of politics. Now, after having said that, I'd like to say something about education. Education must be based on a national policy and a national objective. If your national objective is to transform the country into a producer economy, which means you are producing goods rather than exporting people to become domestic helpers in other countries, then your educational system will necessarily adjust itself. When there was a time when we needed a lot of caregivers, all of a sudden, thousands of schools for caregivers were put up so that we can export these caregivers to other countries. After that, nurses. So many nurses were needed by the rest of the world. So much so that we needed nurses ourselves when we didn't have it. And our doctors were applying to become nurses in different countries as well. What is the national objective? So you have to determine what your national objective is. Therefore, your educational system will follow that. If you are going to say you will be a producer economy and that you will go into steel manufacturing, you're going to fertilizer manufacturing, pharmaceutical industries, then what will happen is that your educational system will be producing students that will answer the needs of these industries, not domestic helpers. And this is where we should go. Unless this national objective is reiterated and seriously implemented, we will have an educational system that will continue to produce, at best, a high quality of domestic help.
Yeah,
Profe-
yeah,
Professor Carlos.
Yeah, before you call on MJ. Well, I'm an educator and I have been teaching for the past 55 years. You know, I started teaching when I was 20, so I'm 75 now. So education is really so pivotal to my professional life. The empirical evidence suggests to us that effective learning happens on the basis of two factors. First, the mastery of the subject matter by the teacher, and two, a fairly high level of motivation by the student, and they are interacting. Therefore, if you want to do any policy changes, that means you pay attention and you invest on the teacher. Do not invest on air-conditioned rooms, classrooms, etc., because these things can happen even under the papaya tree. But if the teacher is bobo, no learning happens. So that means if you have limited number of pesos, put it on the training of teachers. Okay, the other part, and I was triggered by the question of Dante here, is yes, a legislation which is going through the legislative mill in regard to empowering the CHED. Why in heaven's name did we divide our education system into a DepEd, K-12, a CHED, and kung bobo ka, diyan ka na lang sa VocTech, ha? No? I remember, ang uncle ko sabi niya dun sa isang bobo kong pinsan, ay nako kasi mahina naman ulo mo, mag-teacher ka na lang kaya o mag-military. Oh my God! yung bobo yung gagawing teacher, no? So, education is so pivotal to the life of our nation. So, you as chief executives, I would plead that you pay attention to empirical evidence. The critical variable for effective learning to happen is to invest on the teacher. Thank you.
Yes.
Is there a question that you want them to address? Or
Well, Karen, I'm really leading to what Dante said. You need an EDCOM too. Kasi yung EDCOM 1 ang nagganyan yan nag-divide yan sa tatlo. Why they divided that? I don't know. There's something so brainless about this division.
Well, Karen, if I may add, recently, referring to another editorial I wrote, there's some conflicting studies on the level of interest of learners in sciences and mathematics, in STEM. And of course, this is contradicted by the DOST study saying otherwise. But the original study by PIDS was saying that the normal approaches, such as giving scholarships, may not be enough to interest young learners into going into STEM. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on maybe addressing that particular issue.
Okay. Well, the reason there is no interest is because the national objective does not push it. No. You say science and mathematics and the other kinds of areas that doesn't seem to interest the people. No. It's because they don't see anything in the future for them. What do they see? They see the future to be given to them by some Arab family, wherein they can work there as domestic helpers. That K-12 that was mentioned by Clarita Carlos was focused on developing our people to become better domestic helpers. And they have actually said so. If we are going to be domestic helpers of the world, we might as well be the best domestic helpers and the most intelligent domestic helpers. But they can't get out of that rut. No? Why will you get your people to be interested in science if there is nothing that they can see in the future for a scientist? Why don't you come up with a space program? Why don't you come up with a space program that will one day be able to send Filipino astronauts into space in the same way the United Arab Emirates did it? And they did it in less than 10 years. You see, it all depends on national objective. And you cannot define a national objective. You cannot design it unless you have first the intellectual competence to do it, and second, the moral courage to implement it. Okay?
Ang mga tanong ko po ay will concern two different sectors that needs government attention. First, meron po tayong 12 senior citizens sa buong Pilipinas based on latest data. Kung kayo po maging Pangulo, would you support the passage of a Universal Pension Act for seniors? Ano mga programa po ninyo sa mga senior citizens? Para po ito sa mga IPs, kapatid nating IPs. Pabor po ba kayo sa pagsasabatas ng Department of Indigenous Peoples Affairs? Magkaroon po ng boses sa inyong gabinete para po sa mga IP. 18 million population po sila, owner of 48% of total land area in the Philippines. And what will be your legacy sa mga kapatid nating IPs? Thank you, sir.
How can I say no on that kind of a question? If an IP is capable, a representative of the IP has the qualifications and the capability and the stature in this community to represent these people, who will stop him? In the same way, what kind of program can we have for senior citizens? You know, we have the SSS, Social Security System, which was working pretty well before. We also have the PhilHealth. No? It is correct in concept, but poorly administered and implemented because it is a source of corruption. No? These two areas for senior citizens gives government defines the government as some humane, composed of humane people, wherein our senior citizens, no, will continue to be taken care of by society because of what they had done to contribute as productive citizens during their working life. No? And that is the way we must honor our senior citizens. That is the way we should honor our parents and our grandparents. The demographics shows that the total number of people as senior citizens is something like 10% of your total population. The age 1 up to 25 covers about 50% of your total population. So the remainder, which is about 40%, are the working class. Working class. These are if you take care of them from year 1 to 25, they become producer citizens. And after working hard for the next 20 or so years, they become senior citizens. So they contribute to society. Whatever this 40% contributes in terms of work and productivity creates the necessary funds for taking care of the senior citizens and the young ones that you are preparing to become productive labor. This is the way the demographics work. And it can be implemented free of corruption, and it will move smoothly if we only have the competent leadership that we sorely need. Okay, last time.
Why should the Filipino people trust you with their future in the next 6 years?
Because they would know that I'm not just talking about the next 6 years. The Filipino people, after my explanation of our program, would trust us for the next decades and decades to come. We are here not just so that the 6 years are going to be hunky-dory and fine for some people. We are here to see to it that we save lives. And we are here to see to it that we save our nation. Saving the nation is not just for these next 6 years alone. Whatever you do today will be the steps that you need to take so that you achieve the future. The future is what determines the present. If we want our country in the next decade, in the next 2 decades, 3 decades, to reach the level that our people deserve, the quality of life that we want our people to have, that is what determines what we must do today. So today is day one. We prepare for the future.
Okay. So that concludes our debate for tonight.
Alam mo, ang haba pala niyan.
Ang haba yung answers.
Nakapagod din.
Alam mo, half the time also, sorry, magko-comment lang tayo. Before we go, we will let our candidate, chairman, take a breather first before we go into the comments and reactions. But yung comment ko lang, syempre gusto ko mag-follow up sa marami because alam ko po, ang dami talagang pwede natin sabihin, lalo na si chairman. And we've been saying this for so many years already. The same things, actually, wala naman pagbabago yung aming advocacy and our position on many issues. And the difference is, our issue, you can see po, is actually one single issue, which is defined, and everything flows from that. If you want to make the Philippines a great country, which is possible, we need to think not just 6 years, we need to think the generations beyond. And we can do it. And KDP has always been saying that. Let us go, let us jump into the questions that we have. With us today is Ver, of course, our all-in-one technician and soundman. And so let's start with the questions. After a long time, ano naman tayo? Sunshine Channel, good evening po, sir. No to mandatory vaccination. Sana wala na pong discrimination. Tama. Juana Magalona, watching from Samar. Hail Peralta. Blessed evening po to everyone. Mary Grace Mortel Cervera. Good evening, everyone. Watching from Antique. Teodoro Perino, magandang gabi po. Carlo Iway, pakitaas lang yan. Carlo Iway, new email show, CDC guiding Facebook on COVID-19 messaging. Okay, may link siya. Juana Magalona, correct po, nakikita kung sino may sinseridad at kakayahan. Franz Ayalin, good evening, Sir Butch, at sa lahat na nakikinig, watching from Silay City, Negros Occidental. Or Nok King. Sir Butch, sana kayo po ang na-interview ng mga presidential na tatapos sa 2022 kung talagang may ibubuga sila. Gay Hinoo, wala na po bang chance na mapawalang visa ang disqualification ng COMELEC kay General Valdes? Sayang po kasi na hindi magtatakbo si Sir sa presidential race. Your platforms are game changers for Filipinos. Seems like COMELEC has shut the door on us already. Cesar Soberano, good evening to the true patriots, Katipuneros, attending my class every Sunday. KDP chair easily would have won the debate hands down. Been clapping as I watch. Thank you, Cesar.
Thank you.
Jimriel Nacion Garzola. Dito po sa amin sa General Trias, Cavite, mabait mga namumuno sa amin dito, wala namang diskriminasyon. Problem lang ngayon, pasukan na sa klase dahil pakunado lang papayagan sa face-to-face. Juana Magalona, yes, sana marinig namin ng mga sagot. Sana all ni Butch. Mabuhay ka, Butch. Congratulations. Thank you, Juana. Brixton Roel Francisco Morata, pwede po ba magtanong o makakuha ng idea kung sino po ba ang dapat nating iboto na maging presidente? Kasi parang wala na po sa listahan niya ng Valdes. Salamat po watching from Butch.
Alam niyo po, huwag kayong boboto kung alam niyo wala din mangyayari. No? Ipilit natin kung maging leader si General Valdes. No? One way or the other, pag nanindigan tayo at isulong natin si General Valdes, baka pakinggan tayo ng taong bayan.
Okay. Dark Knight. Sir Butch, ano masasabi niyo sa Russia-Ukraine? What were you reading there?
Yung Ukraine na, unang-una, yung Russia-Ukraine ay hindi Russia-Ukraine ang maglaban. Ang talagang laban dyan, yung US, tsaka yung NATO na kumakampi sa Ukraine. Yung Ukraine, ano lang yan, pang-udyok sa Russia. It is a pawn. In the game of chess, yan lang yung pawn. Yan yung sinusugod nila para maguluhan ang Russia. Parang tayo dito sa Pilipinas, ginagamit tayo parang phone laban sa China. Yung mga nandyan, yung mga kunwari kung ano-anong sinasabi tungkol sa China Sea, na nag-i-invade na yung China sa atin, yan ang mga salita na nanggagaling po sa CIA sa pagtuturo sa kalaban ng China. Inuudyukan nila. Ganyan-ganyan po.
Parang si Noy-Noy, ginamit sila si President Noy-Noy.
Yeah.
Okay. Marisa Buya, watching from Hong Kong, Langsong Cuisine. Hello. Rolando Brosas, dapat si Doc Attorney Montemayor na lang tayo. Ayaw siya sa experimental vaccine. Number 35, RJ Havillana for Senator. Number 60, Captain Ray Baleros for Senator. Ano po? Osang Tayag, iboto yung iba. Juana Magalona, ano po ang quadrilateral security dialogue? Yes. Good suggestion to provide big fishing ships. Community fishing here in summer, that's what we are doing. Ang galing. Yes, no such thing as comparative advantage. Ram XB, nice one as always, Kat Butch. Mabuhay po KDP, my mother org. Wow, Chairman, you are so looking good. Diffusing a single control of one entity. Fantastic. This is what we haven't heard from anyone. Ann Sam's Texon, good evening po. Danae Arcilia, good evening po sa inyo sa Prof. Butch Valdes, listening from Hong Kong. God bless you both. Roger Bato, watching. Marisa Buya, it is always educational watching your channel. Salamat sa inyong mag-ama. Rose Victoria, good evening Sir Butch sa Itos. Happy to see you both looking good. Thank you, Rose. Rainier Esguera, bumaha ng pula sa mga kalsada sa Manila sa caravan ni BBM nila sa Manila. Tama ang mga kalye surveys, landslides, BBM at Manila. Milya-milya lamang kay Isko at iba pa. Pwede Oredina, present, all political parties are funded by oligarchs. Sa pipilian ng botante ay pili ng oligarko na ibibigay sa kumulek. Kaya ang iboboto ay pinili na. Nakatali ang pipiliin ang mga bibilang at mag-decide ay kumulek. Hindi na bilang ang boto. Actually, I would disagree with you, Freddy Oredina. KDP was not founded by oligarchs. So we're still here. Anthony Olid. All new ako, no incumbent politicians, actors. Maraming fake land titles, no law-bearing land titles. Pursuant RA 11570. Benjamin Gutierrez, gandang gabi Sir Butch, Sir Itos, mabuhay po kayo. Mabuhay ka, Benjamin. Felix Abila, good evening po. Tonyo Cristobal, Tonton, death moratorium, energy self-sufficient, nuclear energy, quadruple food production, and security. Lian G, hindi sinagot ni Leodis yung tungkol sa batang napatay ng mga kabaro niya. Naka-uniforme pa ng college jersey yung bata, walang patawad. Alam mo na kung bakit. Lian. Lopez Carmelo Aspiras, God bless Katipunan Demokratikong Filipino. Raz Latap Ranieses, good evening mga katipon, long live po. Leody, quinote niya po si Leody. My gosh, kung alam ko lang ganito kahirap ang mga tanong. Nagjo-joke si Rad. Pins Ramboy, God bless Katipunan. Meron ba? Okay. Raf XP, Chairman Butch, the rightful President of the Republic. He is not running, we just had to have a nice show, right? Just to see kung ano talaga yung mga sagot. Pero alam niyo na po yun. Nida Tenoso, watching Fede Oredino, vote for who? None of the above. Failure of election. And Gary Salcedo, great show. Substantive, responsive, Sir Butch. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Meron pa ba?
Wala na. We have 5 minutes left. You want to, I think, say anything
Well,
before we exit?
Ngayong gabi po, binarapat namin ilabas ang mga kasagutan ng KDP dito sa mga tanong na lumabas dito sa debate. No? Upang malaman nyo po na kung paano kakaiba ang posisyon ng KDP sa mga ibang partido. Nakakalungkot lang na yung mga ibang tumatakbo ay hindi dumalo. Pero wala po tayong makukuhang bago maski na dumalo sila. No? Yung pong mga ibang kandidato hindi po mag-iiba. Ang nakikita ko pong lumabas na marunong sumagot dahil may kakayanan siyang magpaliwanag ay si Bongbong Marcos. Hindi ko naman sinasabi na sumasang-ayon ako dun sa kanyang mga sagot. No? Dahil sa akin pong palagay, marami po siyang sagot na kulang at namumulitika lang. No? Pero magaling siyang magpaliwanag. No? Pero kulang po. Dapat po ang ating pong sinasagot, ano ba ang inyong pag-iisip tungkol dito sa mga problema nito? Katulad po ng pagsasabi kong, we must be a producer economy and not a service economy. Ang laki pong bagay yan. No? At yan pong ganyang klaseng pananalita, no? Lalabanan po natin halos lahat ng mga ekonomistang nakaluklok ngayon sa bansa natin, sa administrasyon natin. No? Kasi sila, gusto nila service economy. Yung pong mga ibang nagtatanong na nagsasabi ganito at ganyan, hindi po nila nakikita, palagay ko, yung ilalim ng ating problema. They seem to be talking only of the superficial issue. But despite that, maski na superficial issues lang sila, mas mahusay pa sila magtanong kisa dito sa mga television commentators na lumalabas sa mga ibang debate sa ibang stasyon. At dun sa kabilang stasyon, lumalabas na parang entertainment show lang, no? Pakitaan at parang pakyut at lahat nun, no? Pero dito po, makikita mo, tinetesting ang competence ng mga kandidato. No? At sana mapanood nyo yung debating yan sa kabuuan, yung SMNI debates, para nakikita nyo yung mga sagot ng mga nakaraan, itong mga kandidato. Maraming salamat.
Okay. That's it for tonight. Salamat sa lahat ng viewers natin and listeners natin, RMN, sa RMN, and then sa Facebook and our YouTube. Right. And we will strive to go live every Sunday from now on, lalo na pag pertinent yung mga issues.
Right.
So thank you for joining us.
Sa ngalan po ng ating mga katipon dito sa ating Katipunan at sa magagaling na staff ng DZXL Radio Mo Nationwide, kami po ay pansamantalang nagpapaalam at nagpapasalamat na sinamahan nyo kami ngayon ng Ora de Peligro ng ating bayan at ng buong mundo dito sa ating Katipunan. Hanggang sa linggo po muli, mga katipon, 7 to 9 p.m. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Okay, it's fun.